Yeah, that's lovely. Thank you, Cathaoirleach. And again, I want to thank everyone. And Gail, I was listening there. I thought that was absolutely, I just felt really heartened. Your story is excellent. And I know, and I've been just reading through bits, and when we seen that Ireland signed up to the European Child Guarantee in June in 2021, which aims to prevent and combat child poverty and social exclusion in the EU. And I'm just wondering, because I know Francis spoke about the different supports, but what I'm asking is, what plan do we have? Because we need a plan of what type of childcare centres. Do we look at community-based, cooperatives, employer-led, co-location, some to be managed through maybe the local childcare committee, because it is important that I think, communication is the key here. And I know we spoke about that earlier on, and even we've seen during the pandemic, the OECD noted that it has harmed the health and social and material well-being of children with the poorest, children from the poorest families, or maybe area-based childhood programmes and targeted supports are a priority in the National Development Plan launched recently. So can you tell me, and I know that it was spoke about recently, what do you feel could make a change in these development plans launched recently, that where we can make a difference? Because, like COVID has played a huge part for community support, and whether it's through fundraising or through different grants. And I see it myself, whether it's through food parcels, whether it's through hampers. And I mean, community, people in the community are so good to fundraise maybe for different things. We have our own St. Clair's Hospitality, which is a kitchen in Carlow. And, that plays a huge role in helping families and children. I'm just wondering, how do you feel? Do the government now, we need to look at these supports that have been there. And have you come across this? Also, we spoke about local authority and grants and that, and, or applying to the local authority for your HAP. That's a big issue, because I'm finding, and you spoke about it earlier, if you work and if you're over the threshold, you can lose all your payment. And, it is something that we need to look at. There's no giant up thinking. And even yesterday, for example, Minister Heather Humphreys announced extra school meals programmes. And I know Carlow only got one. And I just think there's big confusion in the sense of, I know for a fact that there is children leaving schools that don't have the school meal programme, and they're being sent to schools that have the school meal programme. So I just think that we need to address this. All schools need to have a hot meals school programme, because what's happening is it is affecting schools, but also parents have no other choice but to send their children to a school where they will be fed and get their meal. And I think that across the board, I think the one thing we've learned from today is that we need to target schools where have a huge impact on children and their lives, that they are fed. And I think every school in the country should have a school meals programme. And I'm just wondering, Christmas is coming now, and it can be very hard for families that don't have any money. And, you see all the ads, and the children are seeing all the ads on the television. And I'm just wondering, what way, how can we try and help maybe, or what support again do we need? Because as Gail said, we do need to have supports there. It might be only short term or whatever, but we need supports, and we need joint up thinking. And, again, just going back to the COVID, I think COVID, we would have seen with domestic violence, the increase in domestic violence during the COVID. We've always had it, but I think it really increased then. And I know in my own area, again, Carlow Kilkenny, we have no women's refuge in Carlow. And, that is something, again, that we need to address. So we need to look at all these different supports. And again, it's everybody working together. Look, I was very touched today by the stories, and that I want to thank everyone for coming in. I know a lot of the things that questions I was going to ask have been asked, but maybe you might come back to me with some answers. Thank you very much again.
Okay, thanks so much, Deputy. I see Gail has indicated firstly, so we'll start with yourself, Gail, and then if any of the other witnesses want to come in as well. So go ahead, Gail. Thanks.
Thanks, Deputy O'Connor, for your questions, and also thank you for making the point of social inclusion, because I think that's really, really important. We're not just talking about financial poverty here. We're talking about the implications for our children in the exclusion in normal activities in society, things like after school activities. I can't put my daughter into after school activities, normal things like sports clubs and things like that, because for us, that's a luxury. I don't have an extravagant lifestyle. I don't smoke or drink. I don't go out. We have a very modest existence. But it is things like that, and it's really hard because I think that social exclusion makes our children not feel valued. And I think we need to remember that. We need to make them feel cherished and valued, because let's face it, that generation, we have an aging population, and that generation is going to be looking after us. So I hope they treat us with more consideration than we are treating them. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Gail. Tanya?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that really struck me about the points you were making was about the non-DEIS schools. And you've hit the nail on the head, actually, because half of all children living in poverty are not in DEIS schools. And actually, the majority of children living in poverty are in rural Ireland, actually. So that's because incomes are lower. And so it's one of the things we really need to think about.
Shauna,
with the national and the local
Sorry,
approach.
just to interrupt. Senator Keoghan, can you just go on mute? Thank you. Okay, sorry, Tanya.
That's okay. It's one of the things we really need to think about, actually, is the balance between the urban, suburbia and rural Ireland, because sometimes children and young people, they're missing out. They're missing out in some of these national programmes that have been introduced. And it's definitely happened in relation to family support. There's some great family support programmes under the ABC programme that TUSLA is managing. And one of the things that we've talked about is we really need to mainstream that. You know, children outside the urban centres need to be able to access those kind of family support measures. I'd love to see a focus on the DEIS model, because obviously it's a really important model for getting extra resources to areas of the country that need it. But knowing that half of all children in poverty are not in the DEIS schools, we need to. So the areas we would see from schools, and we talk to them, principals and teachers would say, because they've no homeschool liaison officer, they're doing huge amounts of work. Like late into the night, trying to help families. Maybe the family is experiencing homelessness, and they're up trying to find a house for them, things like that. A homeschool liaison officer would be able to do that work for the teacher, and the teacher then can go and focus on their day job. They also say they just don't have any extra budgets for anything. So if a child arrives in dirty clothes, there's nothing there. They don't have an extra uniform. They don't have extra budgets that they might have if they were at DEIS school. So I think we need a more flexible approach to children living in those communities where the DEIS programme doesn't exist.
Thanks very much. Francis or Louise, do you want to come in before I move on?
Just to welcome Deputy Murnane-O'Connor's recognition of the difficulties and the complexities. I think it's really important that, you know, elected representatives are really aware of that. I think it's one of the advantages of the Irish system. That people still live in their own communities and witness it. I suppose, you know, speaking exclusively about childcare provision, there's a really straightforward answer, but it's not simple, which is we remain the lowest investor across the OECD in early years. And yes, there are very complex issues to be sorted out, of course, and I don't mean to be disrespectful to other countries or to ourselves when I say this, but other countries have shown us that it's not rocket science either. So if we take the right approaches and prioritise, as I said, children, and I think that the beauty and the what attracts us all to the Scandinavian model is that it gets that universal and targeted correct. So because for us in Early Childhood Ireland, and that's why we regret some of the negativity about the National Childcare Scheme, even though it's entirely understandable, is that actually it does have that the beginnings of the solutions to the problem. And we need buy-in across society. Exactly what Gail is saying, you know, not to be cynical, and I know Gail wasn't for 1 minute, but the children of today are paying the pensions of tomorrow, and they're the taxpayers of tomorrow, and all taxpayers and everybody is paying tax, whether disadvantaged or well off. And we need to have that buy-in, and that's what works in Scandinavian countries. People know that the safety net is there for everybody, and childcare is important and is seen as a part of that. And if if all children are availing of it, all families are paying into it and benefiting from it, that's not controversial. Whereas here, you know, we're stuck in the mindset of talking about, quite understandably, means testing and disadvantage and all of that, and it's very hard to grapple with. But other countries have solved these problems or are solving them, and we need to look to them. But for us in Early Childhood Ireland, the key piece would be that combination of universal and targeted, so that every child has a right, and that all of us collectively as society are investing in it. And for those families that you've described so eloquently, Deputy, who from time to time or through their childhood sadly need extra support, it must be there for them. But of course, because of where we're starting in Ireland, that's a very difficult journey. But I think with the announcements for Budget 2022, provided that we get it right with the complexities, we are starting to move in the right direction, and that's very welcome.